My name's Maggie, and I work for a company. I'm 29 years old and just tied the knot with my husband William. We dated for over 2 years before getting hitched. We kicked off our married life in the apartment I've had since my single days. Dad gifted it to me when I landed this job. With my brother and his wife moving back in with our folks, I figured it was time for me to spread my wings. Dad, being well off, got me a nice apartment close to our family home when I started working. Not sure if he wanted to lend a hand whenever I needed, or just keep me nearby. But either way, I ended up in a fantastic place. When my husband and I decided to tie the knot, his cramped apartment wasn't going to cut it for the both of us. Luckily, I had a spacious place that didn't cost me a dime in rent, so he moved in with me right away. The first time I visited his family's home in a snowy area was during winter. I was blown away by the amount of snow and how chilly it was. Growing up in the city, his family's home felt like a whole new world to me. His mom and brother lived in this quaint old house straight out of a fairy tale, surrounded by fields. Back when my father-in-law was around, they did some farming on the side. Their nearest neighbors were a bit of a hike away. My husband had been living in a tiny apartment, too cramped for both of us. Luckily, I had a spacious place that didn't cost a cent in rent, so he moved in with me right away when we decided to tie the knot. The first time I visited his family's home in a snowy area was during winter. I was amazed by the vast amount of snow and how cold it was. Growing up in the city, his family's home felt like a whole new world to me. His mom and brother lived in this charming old house straight out of a fairy tale. Back when my father-in-law was alive, they used to do some farming on the side. Their house was surrounded by fields, with the nearest neighbors a bit of a trek away. What surprised me even more was that the bathroom was outside the house. I thought I could handle it for short visits, but the idea of living there long-term seemed daunting, especially in winter when it's snowy and freezing. Venturing out to the toilet in the middle of the night takes a lot of bravery. Plus, after a shower, I worried about catching a cold from the chilly temperatures when I visited to meet them for our wedding. I didn't stay overnight, so I didn't experience the shower ordeal, but dealing with the outdoor toilet was definitely tough. However, my mother-in-law and brother-in-law were very kind, which put me at ease. Even though we wouldn't be living together, I wanted to foster a harmonious relationship with them as we became one family, but something nagged at me. While my mother-in-law always greeted me warmly, I noticed she seemed to murmur complaints when alone with my husband. What worried me more was my brother-in-law's previous marriage, which ended in divorce after just a year, a topic my husband avoided discussing. I wanted to ask, but since my husband remained tight-lipped about it, I didn't press the issue. At our wedding, my mother-in-law wore a radiant smile, prompting my father to comment on her kindness. I smiled back, though my own mother had reservations. Despite her smiles in public, she seemed rather sour when she thought no one was watching. "Watch out, she might be two-faced," my mother cautioned. Still, I chose to believe there wouldn't be any problems unless we lived together. We started our married life in the apartment happily, free of worries. However, just 3 months into marriage, my husband began to dump all the household chores on me and make decisions without consulting me. Despite our agreement to share chores since we both worked, he started slacking off. Initially, he helped with tasks like cleaning the bathroom and occasionally cooking dinner when I came home late. But recently, he's become reluctant to do even basic cleaning, leaving me to handle everything, including dinner preparation. Sometimes when I'm cooking after a long day, he'll impatiently demand, "Hurry up, I'm hungry," which only adds to my frustration. Beyond the chores, what really bothers me is his unilateral decision-making. Perhaps there were signs I missed before marriage, or maybe I misjudged him as a decisive and dependable man. Not long after tying the knot, furniture and a sofa suddenly appeared in our home. I was taken aback and asked my husband, "What's going on? Where are we going to put all this new furniture?" He just smiled and said, "I didn't feel the current vibe of our room suited me, so I decided to switch up the furniture for something more to my liking." He wanted to get rid of all the furniture I had chosen and replace it with pieces that matched his taste. If he had talked to me first, we could have picked out furniture together. But he acted on his own, completely disregarding my preferences. It's fine for him to decorate his own space however he wants. But I didn't appreciate him changing our shared living area without discussion. His sense of design didn't seem to make much sense, and I was left speechless by the mismatched colors and shapes of the new furniture. Then came an unexpected proposal. "It'd be great if you could foot the bill for it." After all, this was originally your apartment, right? I was already frustrated that he had taken over the living room with his tasteless furniture, and now he was asking me to pay for it. I wondered if he was joking and asked again, "What? Why should I pay for it? Besides, it's the furniture you bought on your own." I usually don't speak up, but this time I stood my ground. My husband seemed at a loss for words, but it was clear he didn't want to spend his own money. This year marked our first Christmas since getting married, so we decided to spend the holidays at his parents' place. It was my first time staying at their house, so I was feeling anxious and nervous. My mother-in-law spoke kindly, "Maggie, just relax and make yourself at home." However, I couldn't fully let my guard down, mindful of my mother's advice. I remained cautious, sensing there might be more to my mother-in-law than meets the eye. When I first arrived, she did nothing but rest, sharing stories of how brides used to eat alone in the kitchen in the past. "It's nice that we can all eat together now," I said, puzzled by her tales from yesteryears. I noticed my brother-in-law cautioning her, but my husband seemed oblivious. Enduring her sarcastic remarks, I offered to clean up after dinner. She smiled but declined, saying, "I'll handle it. Wouldn't want you to break any of our precious dishes." That's when I realized my mother's advice was on point. The first day was filled with her biting sarcasm, and unfortunately, things only took a turn for the worse the next day. That evening, my husband went out drinking with friends, and with my brother-in-law away on a fire brigade trip, it was just my mother-in-law and me at home. Honestly, I felt quite nervous. After dinner, while she was in the shower, I finally got a moment to relax. But when she emerged, she said, "I'm off to bed now. Don't forget to lock the front door." I awkwardly replied, "Okay," and prepared to take a shower in a separate bathhouse, which was quite chilly. Locals might be used to it, but for me it was a bit of a challenge. Once I settled in, the lights in the main house suddenly went out. As I relaxed in the bathtub, I thought I heard footsteps outside, so I stayed still and listened carefully. After a while, everything went pitch dark. Initially, I thought it was a power outage, but when I peeked out the window, I noticed the lights in the neighboring house were still on. That's when I started to suspect if my mother-in-law was playing a mean prank on me. I didn't want to believe she would do something so cruel, but given her tendency to make sarcastic remarks with a smile, a sense of unease began to creep into my heart. Feeling a sense of urgency, I hurried out of the shower, dried off, and changed into my pajamas. The room was completely dark at first, making it hard to see anything. But as my eyes adjusted, the moonlight seeping through the window helped me navigate. While I couldn't help but think how immature this prank was, I attempted to open the door to leave, only to find it stubbornly stuck shut, resisting all my efforts to force it open. Panic started to grip me. There was a window, but it was barred from the outside. Thankfully, I had my smartphone with me. I tried calling my husband for help, but he didn't pick up. On the third attempt, he finally answered, shouting loudly, "Why are you bothering me? Can't you see I'm busy right now?" It was clear he was drunk, but I desperately needed his assistance, so I pleaded with him. "I'm stuck in the bathroom. Please come over right away," I pleaded urgently. But it seemed he either didn't grasp the seriousness or didn't care, replying dismissively, "You shouldn't have taken a shower now. I'm too drunk to help. Goodbye." After he hung up, I dialed his number repeatedly, but it seemed he'd switched off his phone. I debated calling the police or fire department, but I wanted to exhaust all options before resorting to that. I hesitated to involve the authorities, fearing my mother-in-law's wrath. First, I tried to find a way out on my own. I thought perhaps if I shouted from the bathroom window, someone passing by might hear me. But to my dismay, the window was frozen shut. My husband had mentioned that the pipes sometimes freeze. If I were to remain trapped here all night, I could freeze to death. Just as I was on the verge of reluctantly dialing the police, a voice from outside startled me. "Is there a power outage? Hello? Is anyone in there?" Relief washed over me upon hearing that voice. I heard a series of knocks, indicating someone was trying to assist, and before long, the door creaked open. Gratefully, I thanked the elderly gentleman who had come to my aid. He sighed and remarked, "She never seems to learn, does she? Always finding ways to make life difficult for her daughter-in-law." This kind neighbor was familiar with my husband's family, a distant relative of his. He escorted me to his own home nearby. Upon seeing me, his wife appeared surprised. After the gentleman explained the situation, she warmly welcomed me inside. With a comforting gesture, she offered me a blanket since I was only dressed in pajamas and served me a cup of steaming hot tea. Once I had regained my composure, the elderly gentleman shared with me the unsettling history of my mother-in-law's treatment of her daughters-in-law. Your mother-in-law has a history of mistreating her son's wives. She's trapped several of them in the bathroom before. The wife of the eldest son was repeatedly locked in there and eventually left the household because of it. And it's not just her. When my husband was engaged to someone else before, the mother-in-law did the same thing to her. The elderly couple had noticed the bathroom light shining through the darkness and grew suspicious, prompting them to come and investigate. They knew about my mother-in-law's past actions and had come to the aid of others in similar situations before. Aware of our marriage, they seemed concerned that my mother-in-law might repeat her harmful behavior. Since it was already late and the main house was locked up, I decided to spend the night with the neighbors. The next morning, I was roused from sleep by the wail of an ambulance siren. Peering out the window, I spotted the ambulance pulling up at my in-laws' place, with my husband standing motionless near the detached bathroom. Curious, I made my way over. Perhaps my husband had mistakenly thought I was still trapped in the bathroom and called for help. But of course, the bathroom was empty. I felt a pang of sympathy for the paramedics, who had been summoned due to my husband's misunderstanding. As soon as my husband laid eyes on me, he erupted, "Why is my mom lying there? Weren't you trapped in the bathroom?" Startled, I glanced inside, only to spot a figure sprawled on the floor. The woman whom the paramedics were tending to sat up, gingerly touching the back of her head. It appeared she wasn't in grave danger, and I recognized her silhouette. It was my mother-in-law. Perplexed as to why she was there, I listened as one of the paramedics explained. She seems to have taken a fall and lost consciousness. We'll take her to the hospital for a checkup. It looks like she slipped on some soap on the floor. In my panic during the blackout, I must have left things scattered, like the soap. With no light to clean up, it seems my mother-in-law slipped and fell when she entered the bathroom to check on me in the early hours of the morning. As my mother-in-law was wheeled past on a stretcher, she shot me a stern glare. When my husband was taken to the hospital in an ambulance, the neighbors approached and offered their sympathy, saying, "We're relieved you're okay. It's like a form of divine retribution for the mistreatment you've endured as a daughter-in-law." I expressed my gratitude to them once more, realizing that without the elderly neighbors' help, I could have been the one being rushed to the hospital. After changing clothes, I informed my brother-in-law about my mother-in-law's hospitalization. He hurried off to join her there. Left alone, I made my way to the detached bathroom, pondering over the events of the previous night. At the bathroom door, I noticed a stick wedged in to keep it shut. That explained why I couldn't open it. That afternoon, my mother-in-law returned home from the hospital with my husband and brother-in-law, and she directed her anger at me. "If you had stayed in the bathroom and let me know, none of this would have happened." Before I could respond, my husband joined in, expressing his frustration. "Exactly. If Maggie had just stayed put, my mother wouldn't be in this situation." However, my brother-in-law angrily intervened. "What's wrong with you two? Stop this cruel game of locking my sister-in-law in the bathroom." Later, my brother-in-law returned with a travel bag and announced to my husband and mother-in-law, "I'm done taking care of my mother. I'm leaving this house. Do as you please." Unable to endure it any longer, I turned to my brother-in-law and asked, "I'm leaving too. Could you drop me off at the nearest station?" Despite my husband's attempts to stop me, I stood my ground. "Let's get a divorce. You didn't help me when I needed it yesterday. I'll prepare the divorce papers." I got into my brother-in-law's car, and he drove me to the station, apologizing repeatedly. "I'm truly sorry, Maggie. I never imagined you would go through this. Those cruel people are no longer family to me." I returned to my apartment, prepared the divorce papers, and began packing my husband's belongings. When he returned and saw his things packed, he initially thought I was joking about divorce. But his shock turned to anger when he saw the actual papers. "You're ending our marriage over something so trivial? You weren't even hurt, were you?" Realizing it was futile to argue, I silently handed him the papers. With reluctance, he signed them and left the apartment. However, it became evident that he didn't have the means to rent another place or hadn't found one yet. The truth was, throughout our marriage, he had been dependent on my income, often spending recklessly and even accumulating debt. After leaving our home, my husband initially stayed with a coworker. But as time passed, even that support faded, and he found himself increasingly isolated. Losing his home, evading debt collectors, and eventually losing his job, he found himself in a dire financial crisis. My mother-in-law has become a topic of neighborhood gossip, with rumors circulating that she drove her daughter-in-law to divorce. It seems she's now avoided by others, and according to my brother-in-law, she lives a solitary life, much like my husband. With my brother-in-law also gone, she's left to manage on just her pension, facing financial strain. In rural areas, having a car is essential, but with no one at home and a strained relationship with the neighbors, she's unable to receive any assistance. It appears my mother-in-law, abandoned by both family and neighbors, lives alone. As for my husband, he's consumed by his own troubles and lacks the means to aid his mother. After our divorce, I replaced the tacky furniture he chose with pieces I love. I've embarked on a new chapter, hopeful for a brighter future and open to new, positive experiences.